My family tested my fiancé by hiding his inhaler and abandoning him in the woods. Now my father and brother are cut off, and they never expected I'd choose him over family tradition. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer. And honestly, I need to tell this story because I still can't believe that my own family almost destroyed the best relationship I've ever had in my life. It all started like a year and a half ago, when I introduced Ethan to my family. And from that moment until literally my wedding day, it was one nightmare after another. The thing is that my family has always had this weird tradition of testing the boyfriends of the women in the family, to see if they're worthy or something like that. But I never imagined they would go as far as they did with Ethan. And when I say far, I mean putting his life at risk. I'm not exaggerating. I should give a little context about my family before I get into all the drama. I grew up in a house where the men were, let's say, very macho. Very much into that whole thing of, you have to be strong, not show weakness, be able to fix anything with your own hands. My dad is a mechanic. My uncle has a construction workshop. My cousin works with my uncle, and my brother is a firefighter. All very proud of being tough men. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, I love them. Or at least I loved them before all this. But there was always something about that dynamic that made me uncomfortable. When I was a kid, they looked at my older cousin's boyfriends like they were recruits in a military training camp or something. They would test them, put them in uncomfortable situations, make fun of them, all under the excuse that it was a family tradition and that if the guy couldn't handle that, then he wasn't man enough to be in the family. My mom always tried to soften things, like, oh, come on, don't be so hard on him. But she never really stopped them. It was more like a mediator trying to keep the peace but without confronting the real problem. And I, honestly, hadn't thought much about it until I met Ethan. He's completely different from any guy I'd brought home before. He's a software engineer, super smart, calm, kind, not the type who goes fishing or hunting on weekends. He prefers to read or play video games or go for walks. And he has asthma. It's not something super serious, but he does need his inhaler from time to time, especially if he exercises a lot or is in environments with a lot of dust or pollen. The first time Ethan met my family was at a dinner at my parents' house. I was nervous. I warned him like 1,000 times. I told him, look, they're going to be intense. They're going to ask you weird questions. Just stay calm and don't let them intimidate you. And he was so sweet about it. He told me not to worry, that he could handle anything. But as soon as we arrived and after dinner, my dad took out the chessboard. Turns out my dad is pretty good at chess and has this thing where he likes to play with the family's boyfriends to see how smart they are, or something like that. He told Ethan, let's play a game. And Ethan said, sure, no problem. I lost the first game, which my dad took as a personal victory. But then my dad said, let's play another one, and another, and another. They literally played 4 games in a row, and Ethan looked more and more tired and uncomfortable, but my dad kept insisting. I tried to intervene like at the 3rd game. Like, Dad, that's enough? But he completely ignored me and said that Ethan could speak for himself if he wanted to stop. Ethan, being the polite guy he is, kept playing. After that night, I thought the worst was over. But oh no, that was just the beginning. Like 2 weeks later, Ethan and I went to a mall, and when we came out, his tire was completely flat. We thought it was bad luck, but when we got closer, we saw there was a clean cut on the side of the tire. Someone had slashed it intentionally. Ethan was super confused. I was angry. We called a tow truck and all that stuff. What I didn't know until weeks later is that it was my cousin who did it. Yeah, my own cousin followed Ethan to the mall and slashed his tire to see how he would react to an unexpected problem. When I finally found out, I confronted my cousin, and he just laughed and said it was part of the test, that they wanted to see if Ethan was capable of handling a crisis without losing his composure. I couldn't believe it. I told him that was illegal, that it was destruction of private property, and he just said to stop being so dramatic. Things kept getting worse. Every time Ethan came to family gatherings, my dad, my uncle, and my cousin found ways to make fun of him, especially about his asthma. They would make comments like, oh, you have to use an inhaler. How weak. Or when we were kids, we ran for hours without any problem. One day, we were all in my parents' backyard, and Ethan was helping move some heavy boxes. He started breathing with difficulty and took out his inhaler, and my uncle literally said out loud for everyone to hear, "In my day, men didn't need those things." I exploded. I told him that asthma is a serious medical condition and that it wasn't something to make fun of, but my dad told me to calm down, that they were just joking. Ethan didn't say anything, just stood there with an uncomfortable smile and went on with his business. But I could see in his eyes that he was hurt. Then came the nightmare of the fishing and hunting trip. My dad invited Ethan to a weekend trip with him, my uncle, my cousin, and my brother. He said it would be a good opportunity for Ethan to integrate more with the men of the family. I had a bad feeling. I told Ethan he didn't have to go if he didn't want to, but he said he wanted to make the effort, that it was important to me that he got along with my family. When he came back that Sunday, he looked exhausted and frustrated. He told me that basically they had subjected him to a 3-day interrogation. They asked him questions like, if our house was burning down and you could only save one person, who would you save? Or if we had kids and one of them was in danger, what would you do? Super intense and loaded questions that don't have right answers. And every time he answered something, they criticized or made fun of his answer. Plus, they made him do all the heavy camp tasks, like carrying all the firewood, setting up all the tents, cleaning the fish, while they sat and drank beer. And of course, they made constant comments about his asthma every time he breathed a little hard. I thought that after that trip they would leave Ethan alone. But no. About a month later, my dad organized another camping trip, this time longer and in a more remote place in the mountains. He said it would be the final test, that after this Ethan would officially be part of the family. I was fed up at that point. We had a huge fight because I didn't want Ethan to go, but my dad told me that if Ethan didn't go, it meant he wasn't man enough to marry me. Ethan, trying to keep the peace, agreed to go. He told me it would only be 2 days, that he could handle anything for 2 days. What happened on that trip almost ended our relationship and definitely broke my relationship with my dad and my brother. Ethan came back on Friday night, a day earlier than planned, and he was shaking and furious. I had never seen him so angry. He told me that the first day of the trip was more or less normal, the same old teasing, the same stupid tests. But the second day, things got dangerous. According to Ethan, my dad hid his inhaler. When Ethan realized he didn't have it, he mentioned it to my dad and he just shrugged and said he must have lost it, that he should be more careful with his things. Ethan looked everywhere. In his backpack, in the tent, all over the camp. Nothing. And then, this is what makes me most furious. My dad, my uncle, my cousin, and my brother told him they were going to do one last test. They wanted Ethan to stay alone in the woods overnight, to find his way back to camp in the morning, like some kind of survival challenge. Ethan told them that was ridiculous, that he didn't have his inhaler, and that if he had an asthma attack in the middle of the woods, it could be really dangerous. My dad told him he was being dramatic, that his asthma wasn't that serious, that he was just looking for excuses not to do the test. Ethan, and this breaks my heart to think about it, agreed, because he didn't want to cause more problems. He thought that if he passed this last test, they would finally leave him alone. So he went alone into the woods with just a flashlight and some water. My dad and the others left the camp. They literally left him there alone, told him they would come back in the morning. Ethan spent the whole night alone in the woods, struggling to breathe, scared, trying not to panic. He said it was one of the scariest experiences of his life, that at one point his breathing got so bad he thought he could really die there. Fortunately, he managed to control his panic enough to breathe slowly and calm down, and as soon as the sun came up, he found his way back to camp. When he got there, my dad and the others weren't even there yet. Ethan packed his things, found his inhaler in my dad's backpack, because yes, my dad had hidden it all along, and he walked to the main road where he called an Uber to pick him up. When he told me all this, I was in complete shock. I couldn't process that my own family, the people who are supposed to love me, had put my fiancé's life at real risk just for some stupid macho tradition. Ethan told me, with tears in his eyes, that he no longer wanted anything to do with my family, that he couldn't marry me if that meant having to deal with them for the rest of his life. And I didn't blame him at all. If someone had done that to him, I would also want to cut all contact. I told him I supported him completely, that my family had crossed every possible line and that I was going to confront them. Saturday morning, as soon as I knew my dad had returned from the trip, I went to his house. He was furious that Ethan had left early, saying he had ruined the test, that he was a coward. I exploded. I yelled at him like I had never yelled at my dad before. I told him they had almost killed Ethan, that hiding his inhaler was criminal, that leaving him alone in the woods was abuse. My dad told me I was exaggerating, that it was just a joke, that it had all been in good fun. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him there was nothing fun about endangering someone's health, that his asthma wasn't a joke. My mom was there, and for the first time, she took my side. She told my dad he had gone too far this time, that he needed to apologize to Ethan. My dad said he had nothing to apologize for, that if Ethan was so weak that he couldn't handle a simple test, then he didn't deserve to be in our family. That's when I knew I had to make a decision. I told my dad that if he didn't genuinely apologize to Ethan, and if he didn't promise to stop doing these stupid tests, then I would cut all contact with him. My brother, who had been listening to the whole conversation, told me I was being very dramatic, that family is family, and that I couldn't just cut ties over something so silly. I told him it wasn't silly, that it was abuse disguised as tradition, and that if he couldn't see that, then he was also part of the problem. I left that house feeling broken, but also liberated in a way. For the first time in my life, I was setting firm boundaries with my family. The next few days were horrible. My brother came to my apartment to try to convince me to forgive Dad. He told me I was tearing the family apart, that Dad was really hurt by what I had said to him. I explained to him over and over that Dad had had 1,000 opportunities to be a decent person to Ethan, and that he had chosen to be cruel every time. I told him that if Dad was hurt, good. Maybe that way he would learn that actions have consequences. My brother left angry, saying that someday I would regret this. Like a week of total silence with my family passed, except my mom, who called me every day to see how I was. Finally, I told my mom that I was willing to have a family dinner, but only if Dad promised to apologize to Ethan and if everyone promised to treat him with respect from now on. My mom talked to Dad, and apparently, after a lot of pressure from her, he agreed to do it. We organized a dinner at a neutral restaurant. I thought a public place would make everyone behave better. That dinner was one of the most awkward things I've experienced. Ethan didn't want to go, obviously, but I told him we needed to try, that at least he should hear what they had to say. My dad was there with a sour face. My uncle and my cousin were also there, and my brother. My mom tried to keep a light conversation going, but no one was really participating. Finally, after the food arrived, I told my dad that if he had anything to say, this was the moment. He looked at Ethan and said, something like, "I'm sorry if you felt I went too far. It wasn't my intention to make you feel bad." I was about to interrupt and say that wasn't a real apology, but Ethan touched my hand like saying, "Let it go. It doesn't matter anymore." Ethan just nodded and said he hoped that from now on things could be different. My dad grunted something that sounded like agreement, and then we all ate in tense silence. I thought that with that at least we would have reached some kind of truce, but a couple of weeks later my cousin contacted me. He asked me to meet him at a cafe because he wanted to talk to me. When I got there, he gave me this speech about how I was tearing the family apart, that Dad was depressed, that Uncle felt terrible, that everyone missed me, but that I had chosen a stranger over my own blood. I tried to explain to him that Ethan wasn't a stranger, that he was my fiancé, that he was going to be my husband. But my cousin kept insisting that family is forever and that boyfriends come and go. I told him that if they kept thinking that way, then they had a serious problem with their values. I left that cafe feeling guilty but also angry because they were trying to emotionally manipulate me. We organized a second family dinner like a month before the wedding. This time it was at my parents' house. My mom cooked. Everyone was polite. No one made any inappropriate comments about Ethan, but everything felt forced and fake. My dad barely spoke to Ethan, and when he did, it was in monosyllables. My brother completely ignored Ethan. He talked to me like Ethan wasn't even there. My cousin and my uncle at least tried to make superficial conversation. Before we left, my mom took us aside and told us to give them time, that eventually everyone would get used to the situation. But I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted them to get used to it. Honestly, I was seriously considering keeping my family at a distance from my married life. The wedding day arrived, and it was one of the most bittersweet days of my life. The ceremony was beautiful, small and intimate like we wanted, but my dad and my brother didn't come. My mom came, my uncle and my cousin also came, but Dad and my brother sent a message the day before saying they felt conflicted about coming because they felt I had chosen Ethan over them. My mom was devastated. She cried during the whole ceremony. I don't know if from happiness or sadness about the family situation. I tried not to think about it during the day. I tried to focus on Ethan and how happy I was to be marrying him, but it hurt deeply that my own father wasn't there to walk me down the aisle. After the wedding, things got worse with Dad and my brother. Dad started telling the whole extended family that I had kicked him out of my life, that I had been an ungrateful daughter, that I had chosen a weak man over my own family. My aunts and cousins started calling me, asking what had happened, and when I explained my version of the story, some supported me, but others said I should forgive my dad because at the end of the day, he was just trying to protect me. That made me so angry, because there was nothing protective about what they did. It was pure sadism, disguised as masculine tradition. My dad also started boycotting family events, if he knew Ethan and I were going to be there. At my mom's birthday, for example, he didn't go because I was going to go with Ethan. My mom was devastated. She felt like she was trapped in the middle of all this. I told her it wasn't her fault, that this was Dad's responsibility for not being able to let go of his pride and admit he had been wrong. It's been like 6 months since the wedding and the situation is still tense. Ethan and I have established very clear boundaries with my family. We see my mom regularly. She comes to our house or we go out to eat. The three of us, my uncle and my cousin, have made a genuine effort to apologize and be respectful, so we see them occasionally at large family gatherings. But with my dad and my brother, we've limited contact almost completely. I've told them that when they're ready to give real and genuine apologies, and when they can demonstrate with actions that they respect Ethan and our relationship, then we can start to rebuild. But until then, we need space. I'm not going to lie. There are days when I feel guilty, days when I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have tried harder to keep the family peace. But then I remember Ethan, alone in those woods, without his inhaler, struggling to breathe, thinking he might die. And I know I made the right decision. My mom told me recently that Dad finally admitted in private that maybe he had gone overboard with the tests, but that he's still not ready to apologize directly. That's something, I guess. Although, honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive what he did. Ethan has been incredibly patient and understanding about all this. He has never pressured me to cut complete contact with my family, although it would be totally understandable if he did. He tells me he understands they're my family, and that eventually he hopes things can get better, but he's also firm that he's not going to subject himself to more abuse just to keep the peace. And I completely respect him for that. Last week, my brother sent me a message asking if we could talk. I still haven't responded to him because I'm not sure what to say. Part of me wants to hear what he has to say, but another part is exhausted from this whole situation and just wants to move on with my life without all this family drama. Ethan tells me to do what I feel is right, that he'll support me regardless of what I decide. I guess in the end, this experience taught me that sometimes loving someone means protecting them even from your own family, and that it's okay to set boundaries with the people you love if their behavior is toxic and harmful. I don't know how all this is going to end. I don't know if I'll ever have a normal relationship with my dad again, but I do know that I chose to protect my marriage and my future with Ethan, and that was the right decision. Some traditions need to die, and it's okay to be the person who finally says that enough is enough.